Okay, let's unpack this. You've shared a really detailed timeline,
Yeah.
and today we're doing a deep dive into the Menendez brothers case.
Yeah, it's a case that just keeps evolving.
Right, our mission here is to really get under the skin of these events.
Yeah.
The 1989 murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez,
Yeah.
the trials, all the twists, right up to now.
Exactly. We want to pull out the crucial stuff, help you understand the complexities, the questions that still hang around this, well, infamous story.
Absolutely. And the timeline, it really shows how the whole narrative shifted over time, doesn't it?
It really does. It started with this shocking crime, then moved into that whole story of alleged abuse, which just complicated everything.
Right.
And now we're seeing the convictions themselves back under scrutiny. So we'll trace that journey, hit the key moments, the legal fights.
Yeah, all the things that define the story as it unfolded.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's go right back. August 20, 1989. The murders are discovered in Beverly Hills. Lyle's 21, Erik's 18. They make the 911 call. And the first thing they suggest to the police, mafia. Business deals.
Yeah, that's a key detail right from the start. I mean, looking back, it seems, well, kind of out there.
Right.
But, maybe in that kind of extreme stress, maybe it's deflection, or maybe like a subconscious thing, avoiding a much harder truth.
A truth that wouldn't really come out until later.
Exactly.
And then it wasn't long after, was it? September 1st, 89, Erik apparently confesses.
To his therapist, yeah. Dr. Jerome Oziel.
That feels huge.
Ah.
So early on. It puts a completely different spin on things right away before the investigation really gets going.
It really does. That confession becomes like the central thread. It immediately suggests, motivations other than what the brothers first said.
Yeah.
And the fact it happened so soon, it suggests, well, maybe a huge psychological burden on Erik.
But this is where it gets, really interesting, legally and ethically. December 89, Dr. Oziel secretly records a session.
With both brothers, yeah.
Because he says he's worried about his safety. Alleged threats from Lyle.
Right. And a therapist recording patients secretly. Wow. The implications there, they're massive.
Huge. Ethically, legally, you name it.
Absolutely. It creates this real tension, doesn't it? The therapist's fear versus, the basic expectation of privacy in therapy.
Totally.
And that recording, it just set the stage for this enormous legal fight later on.
Okay, then fast forward to March 1990, another twist. Dr. Oziel's mistress, Judalon Smith, she goes to the police, tells them about the confessions.
Yeah, that feels like the moment the whole thing really shifted, the catalyst.
Definitely. It seems like that's what led directly to the arrests just days later.
Exactly. Smith telling the police basically tore down the brothers' initial story. It gave the police a direct line, pointing right at Lyle and Erik.
Yeah, it moves from maybe it was the mafia to, wait, they admitted it? Well, indirectly admitted it through her report.
Right, based on what Oziel had told her, which came from the brothers.
So arrests happen, first-degree murder charges. And then comes this long, drawn-out legal battle before the trial even starts.
All about the tapes, yeah?
Mostly, yeah. Can Dr. Oziel's tapes be used? The defense is obviously fighting it hard. Doctor-patient privilege.
Understandably, it's a cornerstone of therapy, that trust. And this fight over admissibility, it really shows that conflict, needing evidence versus protecting confidentiality. The defense argument was all about preserving that trust.
So, August 1992, the California Supreme Court weighs in. Big decision.
And it's kind of a split decision, in a way.
Right. They say some tape can be used under this dangerous patient exception. But this is key. They exclude Erik's initial confession tape, the one from September 89.
Yeah, that exclusion is really significant. You have to wonder how filtering the evidence like that shaped the story the juries eventually heard.
Exactly.
Well, the dangerous patient exception usually comes up when a therapist thinks someone's an immediate threat to themselves or someone else. So the court probably felt Oziel's fears met that standard for, like, the joint session tape where both brothers were present. But excluding Erik's first solo confession, that definitely limited the prosecution's ability to show his state of mind right at the beginning.
Right. Okay, so then we get to the first trials, July 1993. And they do it separately, right? 2 juries, one for Lyle, one for Erik.
Yes, separate trials running concurrently.
And the defense strategy, it's huge. They bring in these claims of years and years of abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, mostly by the father, Jose.
Leslie Abramson for Erik, Joe Lansing and Michael Burt for Lyle, big names.
And their argument is basically the killings weren't about greed, they were about fear. Self-preservation after all this abuse.
Exactly. It was a massive shift in the narrative. They tried to paint the brothers not as killers, but as victims acting out of desperation, trying to get sympathy, explain the unexplainable.
And the prosecution, Marciok, Pamela Bozinich, they stick to the financial motive.
Right.
Greed.
Classic courtroom battle.
Yeah.
Abuse versus greed.
And meanwhile, the media is just everywhere.
Oh, it was a total circus. National news, court TV. It blew up.
That media frenzy definitely added another layer, didn't it? Pressure on everyone involved.
For sure. And these two clashing stories just fueled the public's, obsession with it.
So, January 1994, the verdict comes in, or doesn't.
Right. Mistrials for both brothers. Both juries deadlocked.
Wow. What does that tell you? I mean, about how the evidence landed, how the jury saw it?
It tells me the abuse defense was powerful. Really powerful. It clearly resonated with enough jurors on both panels to create reasonable doubt. They couldn't get a unanimous conviction.
So, okay, mistrial, but it's not over. October 1995, they go again.
Yeah.
Retrial.
But this time, one judge, one jury for both brothers.
And here's a crucial difference noted in the timeline. A lot of that graphic abuse testimony, it's limited this time, or even excluded.
Yeah, that's a really critical change from the first trial to the second.
How do you think that might have changed things for the jury?
Well, it almost certainly had a huge impact. If the defense can't fully present the details of the alleged trauma, their ability to make that fear and self-preservation argument is, weakened.
Right. It makes it harder to counter the prosecution's focus on money.
Definitely. It likely tipped the scales back towards the prosecution's narrative, focusing on the planning, the financial motive, the calculation involved.
Well, the outcome reflects that shift, doesn't it? March 1996, the single jury convicts.
Both brothers. 2 counts of first-degree murder, and that special circumstance, lying in wait.
Meaning they believed it was planned, premeditated.
Exactly. The jury bought the prosecution's case this time.
And then July 96, the sentence. Life without the possibility of parole.
Yeah. Seemed like the end of the road, legally speaking.
But as your timeline shows, not quite. The appeals start almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. They fought it for years, up through the California courts, state Supreme Court, denied.
1998.
Then habeas corpus petitions, denied again. Then they went federal. District Court, denied in 2003. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, denied in 2005.
It just shows how incredibly hard it is to overturn a conviction once a jury reaches that verdict, even with all those arguments.
It really does. The legal bar is just incredibly high.
Then things go quiet for a while, relatively speaking, until April 2018. News breaks that the brothers are reunited.
Yeah, in the same prison. R.J. Donovan down in San Diego after being separated for, over 20 years?
It's just a stark reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
The human side, the years passing.
It doesn't change the legal facts, but it maybe brought them back into the public eye a bit, signaled maybe a new chapter.
Which leads us right up to the really recent stuff. May 2023. Their lawyers file new documents.
Right, seeking to revisit the convictions, the sentences, based on new evidence.
And this new evidence includes some pretty striking things. An allegation against Jose Menendez from a former member of Menudo.
Yeah, alleging sexual abuse. Decades later, another person comes forward.
And also this letter. A letter Erik supposedly wrote to his cousin before the murders.
Detailing the abuse from his father, yeah. The timing of that letter, if it's authenticated and dated correctly, that could be huge.
Because it potentially backs up their story from before the crime happened, not just after, when they needed a defense.
Exactly. It potentially corroborates the long-standing claims of abuse and fear, making it seem less like a legal strategy invented after the fact.
Okay, and then, boom, September 2024. Netflix drops the Monsters docuseries about them.
And suddenly, everyone's talking about the Menendez brothers again.
Right. Which raises that whole question about media influence, doesn't it? How much does a show like that shape public opinion, maybe even put pressure on the legal system?
Oh, it definitely can. A huge platform like Netflix. It absolutely reignites the debate, highlights different aspects, maybe puts pressure on officials to take another look.
And it seems like it might have had an effect. October 2024, the LA County DA, George Gascon, says his office will review the new evidence.
Yeah, that was a significant move. Showed an openness, at least, to considering it.
And then, just a few weeks later, prosecutors signaled they might actually petition for resentencing.
Which sounded like a real potential shift. A glimmer of hope for them, legally.
But then, politics, maybe. A change in leadership.
Right. A new DA comes in, Nathan Hochman, and by February 2025, he says, nope, his office opposes a new trial.
And then in March, he doubles down. opposing resentencing, too.
It just highlights how much these things can swing based on who's in charge, their philosophy, even decades down the line. It shows the legal path is still really uncertain.
But then, just this past May 13th, 2025, a Los Angeles judge does make a change.
A big one. Reduces their sentences from life without parole
to 50 years to life.
Right, making them eligible for parole consideration. It wasn't about innocence or guilt, but about a change in California law.
Related to offenders who committed crimes when they were under 26, right?
Exactly. Since both Lyle and Erik were under 26 at the time of the murders, this change in law opened the door for this sentence reduction.
So they're not getting out automatically, but now they can go before the parole board.
Correct. The final decision rests with the parole board.
So after all this, decades of legal battles, shifting narratives, what does this latest development actually mean for them?
It's a massive turning point. It doesn't wipe the slate clean, obviously, but it opens a door that was firmly shut. Life without parole meant they were expected to die in prison. Now, life with the possibility of parole, starting after 50 years served, means the parole board has to evaluate them. They'll look at the crime, yes, but also their behavior in prison, rehabilitation efforts, remorse.
And presumably the context, the abuse claims. Does that factor in for parole?
It absolutely can. The board considers mitigating factors, the circumstances surrounding the crime, so that long-standing narrative of abuse and trauma, the new evidence, that will all likely be part of the discussion before the parole board. It's a complex decision for them.
So this story, like you said, it's far from over. What started as this seemingly clear-cut case, patricide, matricide, it's just morphed into this incredibly complex saga.
About abuse, justice, trauma, and how the legal system grapples with all of that over time.
And this sentence reduction, it's just the latest chapter. Their fate now lies with the parole board.
Yeah, this deep dive really shows how one event can spiral into decades of fighting, changing public views, constantly reevaluating guilt and why things happened, and seeing new evidence, or at least newly presented evidence, come up so many years later. It really challenges how we think about those original verdicts, doesn't it? What stands out to you the most, looking back at this whole timeline? What's the most, compelling or troubling part?
For me, I think it's still that ambiguity around the first trial. The fact that those juries deadlocked when they heard all the graphic abuse testimony, and then how limiting that testimony of the second trial seemed to pave the way for conviction. It just leaves this persistent question, How much did the alleged abuse really play a role? We might never know for sure how heavily it weighed.
That's a really critical point. It really highlights the difficulty. And it leaves a big question for you, listening, to think about: how do we as a society balance the absolute need for accountability when horrific crimes happen with understanding the potential impact of severe long-term trauma, especially trauma that maybe wasn't fully known or understood at the time? Where's the line?